and I'd like to introduce you all to Sharon Davies. Sharon is the Chief Exec of Young Enterprise, and her background is in youth work. She's a qualified youth worker. Sharon, would you kick us off, say hello, and just tell us about your current roles, anything that you think is interesting to tell us about?
Oh, wow. Okay. I have to say, I'm going to start off by apologising because I went swimming. I know, Claire, you did say you can't see it, but I think you can. To everybody, I went swimming this morning, and I think as you get older, when you wear goggles, they kind of really leaves a lasting mark. So if I've got this kind of like panda look, it's because I've been swimming. It's not because I've had a late night raving on a Tuesday and a Monday night. It's not at all. My name is Sharon Davies. I am the Chief Executive. Thank you very much, Mercer. I've got a friend for life there. Thank you. It's always lovely to have a nice compliment in the morning. I'm the Chief Executive of Young Enterprise, proud Chief Executive of Young Enterprise. We're a national financial and enterprise education charity founded in 1962. So we'll be 60 years old in 2022. So we provide young people and educators with the opportunities, and the educators who support young people with the opportunities to build the vital skills and mindsets to learn to earn and look after their money. So enterprise and financial education, we feel, is key to building futures. And we work with volunteers, we work with educators. If you are interested in finding out more about what we do, then I'd love to speak to you, because let's face it, financial and enterprise education is key to fueling the future recovery of the economy. And in many of our communities, and particularly the Northwest, we know that there are significant barriers to social mobility. So, and we feel that there are some key enablers around financial and enterprise education. So that's my job. I am a youth worker, interesting start in life, which I'm sure Claire will ask me about. But yeah, I've had my own epiphany really, and my own kind of break, which has meant that I'm forever grateful really in terms of wanting to pay that back. I think my wife is continuing to text me for some reason. I think she just thinks that I'm here to answer the phone or the doorbell for her Amazon things. I don't know if anybody else has that, just for you because you work from home. It's just like, in 1 minute, she'll be like walking through the door in a minute, rooting through the files looking for insurance. So,
Sharon, tell us about your childhood and about the gay bits, I guess, of your childhood.
Gay bits. Well, I was brought up in a very rural area of Cheshire. My mum and dad were tenants on an estate, and one of four, so I was the oldest, and three younger brothers. And I never didn't think that I wasn't gay. I remember being in primary school and really fancying the twin of, there was a girl and a boy, and we used to play games, and it was always, I don't know whether she's still around, but it was always Katie Wilcox that I fancied, and I was about 9 at the time, and so it was never not a thing. It was always that I like girls, always. And I was really lucky because my parents, were very, very rural upbringing, and they just weren't exposed to anybody like me really, but they were really, really good. They were really good. And so I think I mentioned in my LinkedIn post, I was really lucky. Anybody who's from Chester of a certain age will remember Oliver's, and Oliver's is this gay club. I don't know whether anybody does remember Oliver's, but Oliver's is a gay club in Chester. And I used to go there about 15, 16 on the basis that my friend who would go with me, she was a rocker. And so I would go to this horrible rocker pub, and on the understanding that she would then go to this gay club with me at the age of 16. And yeah, it was I left home really early. I left home at 16, 17, partly because of housing really. It was 3-bedroomed house and like 4 kids, and living with my gran, and my gran was in the house as well. But also I just kind of thought, well, I'm gay, this is not going to kind of work really. My parents were great about it. They were great about me, but I just felt I didn't really belong where I was. So I went off to Manchester, lived in Moss Side for a little while, and had quite a transient kind of 17 to 19, lived in a lot of different places. and then ended up, so I got dumped by a girlfriend with a fiver and a bin bag, and ended up at home for about 6 weeks. I worked in a potato farm and saved some money, and then I set off to, you know, kind of see the world with this money that I'd saved from the potato farm, and ended up in Birkenhead. So that's how far I got. And I ended up working in a quick save in Birkenhead, and that is where my life kind of changed, really, because I met a youth worker coincidentally who basically saw how I worked with a group of lads, and those lads would be very different with me than they would be to other cashiers in the quick save, just because I spoke to them in a way that kind of valued them as a human being. And alongside the quick save, those of you who will remember quick saves, I don't know whether anybody will remember the concessions of liquor save, shoe saver, all those things. And there was a lady from the concession, which was liquor save, who was a part-time youth worker on the Ford estate in Birkenhead. And she saw how I used to work with these lads, and she spoke to her boss, and her boss was a full-time youth worker. And he spoke to me and said, why don't you come and do some volunteering in a youth club? And I did one night and I hated it. And he came back, and this for me was the epiphany, and this is for me why I will never, ever, ever, ever forget the debt I owe, really. He came back, and that's why support is so critical to opportunity, because he came back to me and said, look, give me one more chance. I was on the tills at the time, and I was thinking, why is this weirdo man talking to me? But he said, look, give me another chance. And he offered me a night working detached, which was street-based youth work, and it was working on the Noctorum and the Woodchurch estates. I don't know whether anybody kind of from Birkenhead knows that. And I loved it. I just fell in love with the opportunity to make relationships with groups of young people based on respect. And from there, I just didn't look back. I did some voluntary work, got like 3 or 4 hours a week, and gradually built up my time, and then went to John Moores University about 22, 23.
Very good. Very good. And when we spoke before, we talked about how the sort of experience of being gay and coming out and being different and things like that can have an impact on your career. Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you don't know whether or not it's impacted your career, do you? Because very often it's not what's said in the room when you're there. So I've always been out. I've always been out. So I'm not really sure whether it has impacted my career or not. I was very, very. I've always been very out. Not in a. I've always been very, very open about my sexuality, but I don't think it. I'm just trying to think whether or not I'm not sure whether it has affected my career or not, because I wouldn't know whether or not, you know, it's the things that happen when you're not in the room, really. But I do believe that you're, you know, for a young person who's LGBT plus, there are certain qualities that I see. My younger brother is gay as well, and you know, I've got lots of younger friends, and I think you have an ability to read the room, which I think sometimes can really help in that emotional intelligence. And I think that can sometimes help your career, because you're able to really read situations quite quickly. Because I don't know whether anybody who's joined us today does this, but you quickly, when you meet someone, come to a decision as to whether or not you're going to talk about your wife or your partner. I will quickly decide whether or not I'm going to talk about my wife or my partner. Increasingly, I will talk about my wife anyway, because I just think, actually, you know, I'm really proud to be married to this stunning, amazing person. Why wouldn't I want to talk about my wife? But, you know, you do sometimes think about that. And of course, there is a resilience, there is a resourcefulness about growing up LGBT plus. I think that you do build, and I think that does help your career as well in some ways.
Mm-hmm. And thinking from a young enterprise perspective, then from an entrepreneurship perspective, if we were rethinking entrepreneurship, like we discussed in the title of this talk today, what are your views about, you know, the LGBT entrepreneurs of the future?
Well, I think it's great, because we have you know, we should be rethinking entrepreneurship. We have certain standouts, don't we? When we think about an entrepreneur, if I asked everybody to close their eyes and kind of think of a famous entrepreneur, it would be interesting to hear how many people would say Alan Sugar, or how many people, you know, but increasingly we see the likes of Sharon Davies, who is a fantastic role model for female entrepreneurs. But I think there are some real opportunities to rethink entrepreneurship but you need to have relatable role models. You need to have people who are in schools talking about their lives and being very authentic in who they are, because that then enables someone to think, well, actually, why couldn't that be me? Why couldn't I set up a business? And being gay, or being whatever, or however I did identify, is part and parcel of me being authentic. And me being authentic has got far better chance of me getting what I want, rather than me trying to be someone else. Because everybody, the best thing you can possibly be, better than anybody else, is you. And I think if we can get that through to more young people, you know, and really think about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is about seeing an opportunity and fulfilling a need that no one else is, and thinking about how you are utilizing that enterprising mindset. And I think there are fantastic opportunities to rethink entrepreneurship and to move it on from what it's, you know, because, you know, there is still this sense that it is about profit. It's all about making money. It's all about, you know, how, you know, someone else has to lose for you to have to win. But that's not actually what entrepreneurship is about. There's some fantastic examples of social enterprise, of social entrepreneurs that make a massive difference. Look at yourself, Claire. Look at Matt. I mean, what you've created here, this network, is a fantastic example of entrepreneurship.
Thank you very much. Thank you. How would you say, like you talked about role models there, we've got a group here, we've got nearly 30 here, but we've got maybe over 500 across our network who've subscribed to this. How could we support the people coming through, or how could we better support each other, do you think, to be better in business or in entrepreneurship?
I mean, I think, you know, it's increasingly important to have that relationship, isn't it, between, you know, education and business, or education and careers. And what we want to do is make sure young people get access to really relatable role models. So if you have got time that you're able to support, you know, work together with organisations like Young Enterprise, there are others that can facilitate you either going into a school or volunteering as parcel of our programmes and services. And if you feel safe to do so, part and parcel of you telling your story as an entrepreneur, or in terms of your career, is about sharing who you are as a person, as long as you feel safe to do so. And I think what that then does is provide young people with opportunities to think, well, actually, it kind of gives some people a bit of safety and a bit of extra context that they just might not ever have had before, to make them just look up a little bit more to think about what's possible.
You talked a little bit about the stuff that's said when you're not in the room. And I guess, I don't know, I've got some experiences of being in the room where people have been talking about other people. What do you think we should do when we find ourselves in that situation? Shall I give a quick example?
Yeah,
I'll try and make it quick. So I was sitting eating on holiday. We're in the south of France. We're outside seating. And you know, in France, they always put the tables too near each other. So we were sitting next to a group of 6 surgeons, and we knew they were surgeons. There was a conference on, and they were all giving each other the professional schmooze of, you know, your hands are worth $1 million, you know, all this kind of stuff, and doing that professional flirting. And a fellow walked past and he waved to them all, and they all waved. And when he went away, they started slagging him off, and it was really homophobic, really, really offensive language as well being used. These were surgeons, so quite senior people in society, you know, the people that we're relying on. And we were sitting right next to them with like 3 inches or something between our table and theirs. And my wife just said, "Excuse me." And she took them all on. And said, that's completely unacceptable. You need to think about who you're sitting next to, you know, and you need to think about whether that's an appropriate thing to say about, a colleague. But it just made me think that chap who's walked past, his career has to be affected by that level of homophobia existing. Now, we hopefully made them feel terrible about themselves, and maybe they didn't do that again. But, you know, it's not always very easy to stand up against 6 people who are older than you, and obviously, you know, professionals and senior people. At one point, the most senior fellow, whose hands were worth $1 million, said, oh, and she went, I don't want to discuss it with you. And they just sat in silence. So it was a brilliant moment. But how can we be better at doing that kind of thing? And how can we try and make those people's lives in their work a bit better when we are in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I have to lean into my youth work background. I always think that you can't shame anybody into changing behaviours. So, you know, your intervention will have definitely made them think. Whether or not it would have changed their future behaviours, I don't know the answer to that question. But I think you know, when we're working with young people, my experience of working with young people who have got some pretty set thinking is that you encourage them to come out of the corner, really, to have a discussion, to, you know, to give them some time to think of alternatives, really. So that to me has always been really, really important, that you just can't, you know, you just, particularly with young people, you can't shame that change of behaviour. And I also think there's like loads of intersectionalities as well, isn't there? You know, sometimes I don't know whether or not when I've not been in the room, things haven't happened for me was because I was gay or because I've got a very strong Northern accent. You know, and we laugh, and, you know, and in the Northwest, it doesn't really matter, but sometimes it does matter when you're further down south, you know, those conversations. And you know, you've got the class, you've got, obviously there's race intersectionalities as well, and I count myself as a very privileged middle class woman, and I feel like I've got a responsibility to have those conversations. And I think there is something there about being clear about what you're not going to tolerate, and sometimes it's about making start.
Wow. Sorry, Anselmo, could you mute yourself, please? Sorry,
yeah, sure. Sorry.
No problem. I think sometimes it's about, even if you just make a start in having that conversation, it's never going to be perfect, but it's about you making that start, making that intervention, which just either says, you know, I'm not comfortable with what you've just said. Can you just explain it to me a little bit more? It's a question, isn't it? Rather than you've got to decide whether you want to engage in a conversation where you want to find more about the heritage of whatever it is that person said, or whether you just want to shut them down. And for me, it's always been about, well, I want to find out more to help that person work through what they're thinking, rather than trying to shut them down, because I think that's how long-term change happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish you'd been there that night in France.
Well, you know, it probably wouldn't have worked, would it? Because, you know, they're probably already quite set in the way. So your wife's intervention was probably the more, you know, more impactful, if I'm honest, because I can't imagine if I was sat there going, well, tell me why you've just said that. They're not in a very strong Northern accent. They're going to be like, wow, who are you?
We've seen a lot of change in LGBT rights and things like that over the last 20, 30 years, certainly. What do you think the challenges still are? And how can we help, you know, younger people sort of overcome those?
I mean, I think it's about, I think there are challenges, aren't there? There are challenges, but I also think it's about us doing the work ourselves as individuals and as a community, because I think there is more that we can do to ally others. And we talk about intersectionality all the time, you know, we think about that, to act and support others. I think we can do a lot more of. I just think there are fantastic opportunities for really relatable role models. And it's not always about somebody old like me going into school. Sometimes it's about a younger person who is that little bit more accessible for a young person in school to say, you know, this is me, I'm early on in my career. So it's not necessarily about director level, it's earlier on in careers. And so as directors, I think we can enable some of our early starter staff to maybe volunteer in schools or to work in, or, you know, support young people that way. It's about providing our own employees with opportunities to do that work themselves, that professional development work themselves, because people, it depends on where, it's a lottery otherwise. If you think about it, it's a lottery whether you get to do that work, to be that ally, to be that person in that space where you and your wife were, that made an intervention. How many hundreds of thousands of people wouldn't have done that? Mm. Now, you've done that because of your life experience, but we need to make that more consistent. So how do you do that? Well, you can't expect it's all going to happen in the home. So you've got to either do that in work or do it in school. So I think businesses and employers can think, well, how can I help this professional development of my early career people? And then we could be thinking in schools, well, what can we do to make young people's access to role models, to skills and mindset more consistent?
And I feel like that's kind of the answer almost to my next question, which is about, we've got all these policies and procedures and things in place in businesses, but how do we bring them to life? I think that's one good example. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
I mean, I think young people particularly learn by doing, don't they? Lots of people will want a practical experience. So one of the things that we have is where in Young Enterprise, where young people will practically set up and run their own business. And that experience of being able to do something and have support from somebody who then is volunteering to help them reflect on that learning, help them think about what they would do differently, is really, really key. So providing young people with relevant, accessible, practical opportunities to learn. I have to say, we are really suffering from the lack of youth provision. There are very, very few places for young people to access, on a free at the point of access basis outside of the home. So again, this whole lottery of, it depends on where you start, it depends on where your network is. It does really limit social mobility in our current climate, unless we can have more organisations like Young Enterprise, but not just Young Enterprise, more employers who are willing to invest in their workforce, who would then invest in their communities. So yeah, I think it's about practical relevance experience. It's about kind of employers reaching out to their local schools or working with organisations who already do that. And it's also about really investing in that early career element of your employee cohort, because they can make a massive difference to young people's mindset and aspirations.
Mm-hmm. In the last one of these meetings, we had Hannah Bardell, who's an MP from Scotland, from Livingston. And she was trying to encourage us to support, with lobbying government for certain things. What would you be asking government for, or what do you think we as a group could be asking government for?
I mean, I wouldn't know. I mean, for me, I think the whole focus is that we are very much in a very knowledge-based curriculum right now. It's all about kind of what you know rather than what you can do. I think what we could see more is that kind of dialing up of practical applied learning, where young people get the opportunity to do things, and then we're able to then, or project learning or working with others. At the moment, it's very focused on what you know, and then you don't get the opportunity to build that skills and mindset. So that was certainly one policy ask that I would be thinking about. I have to say also, financial education is really, really key, really, really key. And at the moment, obviously it's in the secondary curriculum. It obviously needs to be in the primary curriculum, because young people or children, kind of develop their mindsets around finances around the age of 7 from what they see. So, we need to kind of get there quicker, so that, again, it shouldn't be a lottery of where you start from or where your networks are. You need to be able to access that in school. And it's, teachers are hugely, I don't know if we've got any teachers here today, but, they're under the cosh massively with workload. So we have to find ways of helping them to embed it in the curriculum so that, it's sustainable. And any policy ask that we have, it's all well and good, organisations going into schools, but it has to be sustainable for the schools and for the teachers, and for it not to feel like a burden, but part and parcel of what they do.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. Matt, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I was just really interested to hear that, and I'm kind of that point about kind of Alan Sugar really resonated for me, because I remember being quite naturally entrepreneurial as a youngster. I got sent to detention once for selling sweets on the school bus, which was probably quite formative for me. But I remember never really kind of chiming with those portrayals of entrepreneurship that were shown on TV, and I don't think that's changed all that much. You have people being kind of torn apart on Dragon's Den by a very caricatural type of kind of entrepreneur. You have The Apprentice, etc. And I wonder, how, particularly perhaps for young LGBTQ people, do you find that's kind of an issue, or something you have to kind of work with them about, that kind of idea of what an entrepreneur kind of looks like or acts like? Because it's pretty kind of toxically masculine in some ways, the kind of caricature of an entrepreneur, isn't it?
No, I think you're right, and I think it's not just young people who are LGBT plus. I think also, from a race perspective, entrepreneurship at the moment is seen. You've got the likes of Alan Sugar. It's great that Stephen Bartlett is going to become the new dragon. I don't know whether you know Stephen Bartlett, but he'll become one of the new dragons. I think that's a fantastic representation for young people to see. A fantastic alternative, I think, at the moment in Dragon's Den is Sharon Davies. I have to say, because she demonstrates emotional intelligence, empathy, humility, and really holds space. And so in lots of ways, she is directly opposite to many of her colleagues. And I think more and more people are starting to see that as a real alternative to that kind of toxic masculinity. I have to say, it's on us, right? It's on us. It's about us being able to provide those role models to young people, to gently nudge them into lifting their heads and saying, well, actually, Matt, you were selling those things in school. Why can't you? What's next then? What's next in that journey for you? What are you going to be doing next? And, it's about that mentorship, allyship, being really invested in someone's long-term journey, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question from chat here, which is building resilience is a great skill. It's a shame that we don't get trained around resilience when we're at school. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's a great question. I think it goes back to having real opportunities to apply learning. So you develop that, and it's understanding failure for what it is. And failure is feedback, really. It's feedback that you necessarily want to try something different next time. So like resilience, like experiences of failure, like problem solving, they all require you to do something. It's about having those real applied learning opportunities. So yes, they are offered in many great schools. So you have the likes of Duke of Edinburgh's Award, obviously you've got Young Enterprise, you've got other opportunities, but it's about making them really consistent. And the person who's asked the question has hit the nail on the head. At the moment, it's not consistent. It's not offered to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of sort of other thoughts in the chat, it's not many sort of direct questions really. There's but do check those out, participants, because there's some interesting discussions kind of going on in there as well. I wondered, Sharon, if you kind of think that you touched a little bit on kind of the skills, I guess, that you think that you perhaps developed as a gay person, in terms of kind of judging people and kind of being quite kind of I guess I suppose it counts kind of emotional intelligence, doesn't it? But having that real kind of judgment of people and your safety about coming out to people kind of early on. What kind of other things you think, particularly for kind of young LGBTQ people, do you see that as kind of something that they still develop these days, or are there kind of other skills around that you think that younger LGBTQ people are developing as a result of their experiences of being queer?
I mean, I think I'm probably a bit old to kind of reflect on that, really, but in my general observations of Gen Z is that they are hugely tolerant as a generation anyway, and they think quite differently to the former generations about difference and tolerance, and very brave generation actually in calling out quite a lot of injustice. You've seen that obviously in various forms over the last 2 years. But I do feel that there are some kind of key calling cards like empathy, like resilience, like the ability to never obviously walk in someone's shoes, but just hold the space to listen to someone else's journey. I think you can only really, I think, develop all those qualities through a lived experience, I think.
We've got one more question in chat from Hannah. As education, business policy, community cohesion and inequality are impacted by governmental policy, what are your thoughts on political literacy with young people?
It's a great question. Do you want to read it to me again? It was quite full of content.
Yeah, there's quite a lot there, wasn't it? So as education...
I meant that in the nicest way. It was a really good question. I just need to kind of get my head around it.
As education, business policy, community cohesion and inequality are impacted by government policy, what are your thoughts on political literacy amongst young people?
I think it's really important. I think it is really important because we have a generation at the moment who are seeing quite a lot of things that are happening over the last 2 years, which obviously include quite a lot of political developments. And there are opportunities, aren't there, to make changes. And I think enabling young people to understand that they have choices, that they're able to kind of make informed choices and how they can go around making change is really, really key. So I do feel as part and parcel of, whether that's as part and parcel of citizenship or whatever, I do feel that that's really important, delivered in a neutral way, so that enables that young person to enable them to make their own choices is pretty key. But it's how do you support the teachers to be able to do that? There's some similarities there with financial education. A lot of the reasons why we ask teachers about doing financial education is that they don't feel they get enough training to be able to do those things. So again, with political literacy, it's about being able to support or introduce the support mechanisms to enable that to happen. Having said that, if there was more youth provision, that wouldn't necessarily rely on the formal, because what we've got to remember here is education is bigger than the formal education system. I'm a product, the light switched on for me through an informal education system. So my journey was because of youth work, and I will never ever stop paying that back. But we've got to get more, and at the moment, youth work, you have some great examples of that, but quite a lot of youth work is reliant upon volunteers, volunteers who are giving up their time in their communities because they believe enough in young people. But, politically, it would be, we would do well to invest in youth systems, really. And also connecting informal and formal education systems. There are some great examples of that where schools work very closely with youth centres and youth zones, and we could learn a lot more from that.
I agree with that. We're going to go into a breakout, but before we do, Sharon, just one more question for us to galvanise us going into that discussion. What's the one thing you would ask us to do as leaders, let's say, from across all sectors, all different shapes and sizes of organisation? What's the one thing we could be doing to help?
To
help young people, or to change the structures that we're in, the infrastructure that we're in, or to lobby, or...
Yeah. What I would say it's a Northwest base, this, isn't it, that we're talking about here?
Well, we've actually got people from across the country now since we moved online this year. So yeah, we're everywhere now. Fantastic.
Well, what we know is that kind of opportunity and support, build young people's futures. That's what the key is. It's like, how do we provide more opportunities, and how do you provide the support to enable them to maximise those opportunities? And I think as leaders, we can all do something to contribute to one of those things. So we either are able to provide the support, whether that's through mentorship, volunteering, to enable a young person to reflect on their journey and see what they can do differently. So the likes of Matt, if Matt had that mentoring, at that point where he was like kind of selling sweets, who knows what would have happened from there, who knows. But, and the opportunities are key as well. So are there opportunities that we can facilitate as leaders, whether or not that is access to the workplace or supporting work-based learning? They are, I cannot tell you how important it is to consistently provide opportunity and support. Otherwise, it goes back to the lottery. It goes back to the lottery, because the whole thing for me, and I cannot stress it enough, is otherwise you're reliant on your personal network, which may be extremely limited, and the opportunities that personal network brings you.
Yeah. We've just had a last minute question come in from Sean, so I'm going to ask it. Should there be a positive bias to LGBT apprentice and mentoring young LGBT plus? I think we're talking about sort of positive discrimination, which often has a negative connotation, but actually, I feel like sometimes barriers are there, and to break down systemic barriers, you need to sort of give certain groups a bit more of a shove. So I think that's the question, but Sean, if that's wrong, the way I'm asking that, please do take yourself off mute and ask it directly. I think we've got approval, Sharon. So what do you think about positive discrimination?
Well, I probably would sidestep the positive discrimination and say, it is about being very cognizant of the barriers that those young people are facing and about addressing those. It's about equity, isn't it? Rather, I think positive discrimination has an association of its own, and I think if we are able to say, well, actually, it's about meeting head on the barriers that those young people are experiencing. It's about equity, about addressing that. Then we should be providing that.
Thank you very much.
I think unpacking positive discrimination is a really important thing to do, because I think quite a lot of people are quite wary of that term. But I think Sean mentioned it. There are opportunities, I think, to really think about how we recruit apprentices. Where do we recruit them from? Where do we, should we be, if there are LGBT plus spaces where young people frequent, we should be making sure that they get access to those opportunities, so that they know that they're there. So very often it's less about positive discrimination. It's more about being really targeted about making sure young people in those spaces get the support and the opportunities to access them.